year 2020 to 2021, and there are at least 3 more lining up for the coming months. So we'll have more details for you later in the seminar. So first of all, yeah, so recording has started, as you can see. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our speaker and discussant for today. Yeah, so as you know already, our speaker today is Dr. Maurizio Atzeni. A lot of you have probably met him or known him for years, but anyway, yeah, so he's a researcher at the Center for Labor Relations, Argentinian National Research Council, which is CEIL, CONICET, based in Buenos Aires. And he previously held positions in Loughborough and De Montfort universities in the UK, and he's currently an honorary associate professor with us at the University of Leicester. So, so probably a lot of you are very familiar with Mauricio's work. So workers' collective mobilization and organization apparently is a recurring theme from his earlier contribution to John Kelly's mobilization debate, to looking at alternative forms of worker organization, especially those of precarious workers in recent years. So he has published extensively on labor conflict and precarious workers' collective organization in various journals and book chapters. Just to name a few, he is the author of Workplace Conflict, Mobilization and Solidarity in Argentina, published in 2010, and of Workers and Labor in a Globalized Capitalism in 2014. He has also edited a number of volumes covering global perspectives on workers and labor organizations. He also serves in editorial boards of various journals, including Work and Employment and Society, the Journal of Labor and Society, and of Work in the Global Economy. He is also part of the organizing team of the International Labor Process Conference in Buenos Aires in 2018. Personally, it was the most interesting conference experience that I've had in the past few years. So, yeah, so yeah, and this is our today, and we also have Dr. Joseph Chanaro to be our discussant for Mauricio's paper. So Joseph is a lecturer in political economy, and he's also a member of CSWAF apparently. His research interests broadly covers critical political economy, especially in themes such as class crisis and employment, or the labor market in general. He has also written extensively on precarious employment, and recently, in 2019, he also published a manuscript about insecurity, precarious work, and the labor markets. So, welcome everyone again. We expect the seminar to run for about 90 minutes, so the timeline would be something along the lines of 30 minutes for Maurizio to talk about his paper on fetishism on trade unions and alternative approaches, and then there will be 5 to 10 minutes for Joseph to respond to the paper, given that he has read it in detail. He has read it in depth, and then afterwards we'll open the floor for any questions and comments to Mauricio's paper. So I would appreciate that if you put your mic on mute during the presentations, and also during the presentation, even though you're not speaking. So just to avoid any sort of disruption because of noise, and you can also think about questions and comments, but I would appreciate that if you could leave your questions until the Q&A section, though. But if you can't do it, you feel free to pop in your question in the chat box as well, and I'll pick them up. I'll pick them up afterwards. So yeah. So without further ado, Mauricio, please go on with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot to all for coming. I think it's really good to have such a number of people interested in this presentation, and which means that what I thought it was just like a an entertainment with theory for me at the beginning when I thought about this idea of fetishism and the trade unions. It seems that there is a real need to discuss about the problem of organization. I think there is a problem in the conceptualization of workers' organization today, and probably across the history of the trade unions movement and the workers' movement. In my case, and just to give a sort of background to this paper, I can say that the issue of organization has always followed me in a sort of questioning me since my early work on my PhD. I've been in doing research and in contact with form of organizations which were either alternative or against existing trade unions, and so I've found in a way this to be an interesting stream of research where I can sort of contribute, especially because the evidence of traditional studies in industrial relation was an evidence of studies on trade unions. So I think there was a need to certainly add in terms of looking at different alternative in parallel underground form of workers' organizations beyond the trade union form. So in a way, I can say that, I mean, this paper in which I'm putting this idea of trade union fetishism, it's a sort of a development of previous work I've been doing and previous relation with the reality of worker struggle, basically. Across my experience of different cases of organization of workers in Argentina, in the formal sector, in the cooperative sector, when I was looking, for instance, at the experiences of the recover factories, and lately on the organization of precarious workers, something which I'm pursuing now by looking at the organization of platform delivery workers, which is in a way a sort of continuation again of something that I did a few years ago, looking at the pre-platform delivery of food in the cities. So this, just to give you a little bit of a background of something that of the situation of the preceding to this paper, in which, as I said, it started out as really a sort of exercise, and I was sort of trying to test it with colleagues here in Argentina, which have a very much trade union focus approach to the issue of workers' organization. So this was strange for me in a way, because of course there was like here a parallel with the more English-speaking literature on workers' organization, which is clearly, at least in one part, and until recently, very much trade union focus in different ways, by looking at strategies, by looking at practices, and by looking at including mobilization theories. I had already stated this when I was writing about mobilization theory, and so it's already published there. My view that Kelly's mobilization theory was actually a trade union centered theory of organization, not and then not a theory of workers' mobilization. It was strange for me to see this parallel between the English-speaking literature on industrial relation, to which I am very well familiar with, the new production of the sociology of work in Argentina after the 2001 crisis, when there has been a huge increase of studies on the field of the sociology of work, and especially of workers' organization and labor conflict, simply because there was also a growth of labor conflict, conflict by workers in the formal sector, basically, in a context very favorable for workers in the formal sector, with the economy growing and the government supporting a pro-labor sort of pro-labor. It was a pro-labor government. So this in a way, for me, if there was clearly through the analysis of the literature, of the English-speaking literature, a tendency to look at the trade unions as the form of organization of workers. And I'm not going to go through all the different contributions in this direction, which are detailed in the paper. The case of Argentina was like a sort of the exception that confirmed the rule in a way, or at least this is I put it, because here there is clearly, or there was clearly, the necessity to emphasize the trade union form in a time when trade unions were actually growing and recovering in terms of strength, in terms of number, because the economy was growing. But still, what about the other 50% of the working class in Argentina, which remain in the informality, which remain in condition of precariousness? So I mean, it was justified to look at trade unions and put it at the center of analysis. But still, this implied the abandonment, basically, of previous studies that concentrated on more on social movement mobilization. So I think the new positive economic context and the economic growth that produce revitalization and renewal of trade unions activities in Argentina was clearly shifting the pendulum, shifting in terms of what kind of mobilization. But at the same time, the condition of workers in Argentina didn't change it in such a radical way from before the crisis and after the crisis. So not even to talk about the context of today's, after 4 years of again new austerity, new with right-wing Macri governments, and plus COVID-19 crisis. So well, I don't go further on this. So I think this parallel is quite interesting to see how deeply is this idea of thinking about workers' organization in the trade union form is across the world, I would say, or at least across the world in which trade unions have had a strong and important role. Which, of course, this is clearly the case in Argentina, where compared to other countries in the world, trade unions are still representing almost 40% of the formal workers population. So we are talking about institutions which are politically and financially solid, and at the moment supporting a government which is a Peronist government. So it's historically a pro-labor, pro-union movement and government. So this in terms of parallelism, this parallel, I think was and is interesting to sort of reaffirm the need to question this centrality of the trade unions. And I think and this is part of another section of the review of literature I did. I think there is a widespread movement away from the union form within the field of industrialization and sociology of work, but also in other fields. Actually, labor history was a very much trade union history, and thanks especially to the work of the global labor history team at the Institute of International Institute of Social History. They have moved away from trade unions as the form of organization of workers, and they have been looking at other form of workers' organizations beyond the trade unions and in different places. So not just in industrialized places where trade unions have most of the time been able to eradicate their activity because of course, the number of people involved in industrial work. And the same can be said about the anthropology of work, the labor anthropology, which are very much interested in issue of organization, but connected with class issues. So I think these two examples of sister disciplines that have moved from a trade union focus to look at broader issues of class is fundamental for our field, especially at the time in which the world is going back to what Marcel van der Linden said, that there is a return to merchant capitalism in the way in which capitalism is working, is going back to cottages where merchant used to bring the material for work, and in a way we can see it today with this fragmentation of work. So if we are really looking at the form of organization today, we probably have to first start at considering, well, what's the kind of workers this capitalism is producing. It's a fragmented, it's a precarious workers. It's an informal. It's certainly not the workers that has been the normal member of trade unions. So from this point of view, I think there is a need to reflect further on the issue of organization, and that's why I think that there's a need to go away from or to go beyond the trade union form as the form of organization. Sorry, I'm a bit disturbed by WhatsApp that are coming to my phone. So from time to time, I just scroll the finger just to put the banner out. Anyway, So my idea so I was mentioning actually the new development things that have recently, even in the field of industrial relation, sort of consider this changed reality. And here I can mention the work of Claudio Morrison and David Sacchetto on migrations, the work of Davide Perot, again on migrants workers in the UK, and the form of organization they have used. So there's a number of work across the gig economy, looking again at form of organization that build trade unions, build the workers' organization, rather than starting from the organization in itself, which then look at the obstacles and also sometimes the power that workers in certain location can have in building their organization. And this goes together with work in other disciplines. For instance, in critical development studies, work using the social reproduction perspective and linking a form of organization, or actually no organization, no mobilization, which is also the other side of the coins we need to look at, because sometimes I think there is a sort of overemphasis on glorious struggles and which leave aside the no glorious struggle or the no mobilization of people. So we need to know why people do not mobilize, and that's something that trade union focus studies cannot answer, because they of course need the organization to work with. They need to feel comfortable in dealing with employers and employees, and and organization of one group and organization of the other group. So there's a huge possibility of expanding research by just using bridges and cross with other disciplines and other approaches that again look at not just the contradiction capital-labor, which is fundamental, of course, but also another contradiction that capitalism produce, and in which struggles of workers can mixed up with struggle of citizens in different scenarios. So my idea of trade union fetishism, given this background, is really a sort of in a way a theoretical provocation. I'm not a Marxicologist, so I think my theoretical treatment of fetishism as associated to trade unions need further development. But here it was just really like a provocation to go away and to shift our methodological focus, which of course it doesn't mean to be against trade unions. It doesn't mean to adopt an anti-union perspective. Quite the opposite. I think by expanding our spectrum of research beyond the union as institution and going more into the union as a movement, and so the trade unions really as a sort of a processual form rather than a set form, we can be able to go beyond the fetishism and show that in reality we are talking about people. So I would leave the fetishism question from, I mean, deepening of the trade union fetishism theory or theorization for a later discussion, which I think important. I just say that for me it was and still is like a sort of a methodological provocation. Because of course fetishism is quite a strong concept, and Marx used it to show that basically the reality we were observing every day was hiding a different kind of reality. So basically the reality of social relation masqueraded by a reality of commodification, of marketization. So in a way, it is strong to say that there is a fetishism in the union form, because the union form it's at the same time the expression of social relation. So in the union form, we find the fetishism that Marx described it, because when he was saying that market relation were hiding social relation from view, he wasn't denying them market relation were existing. So at the same time, I mean, we can think that trade unions are a class organization, but at the same time they are institution, and we have to deal with it. And actually, this is what Marxists have always done. Gramsci, of course, is the most known theoretician about trade unions, and he was the one that coined the idea and the concept of industrial legality. So the need for trade union to comply with rules and regulation because they agree to trade the labor force, the value of workers, and to set these within systems of industrial relations, we can say, produce industrial legality. But it also produced, and I quoted in the paper, it also produced monstrous thing from the worker point of view in terms of their organization. Okay, so this. So there is a line, a theoretical line, which sits in Marxist analysis of the trade unions form, which has always been quite critical, at least of the trade union as institution, which it was also the central pillars of social democratic view of society and also of trade unions. So here I think we have also probably something to discuss further, which has to do maybe with politics and maybe with political construction, political views of how to build workers' power. Clearly, trade unions have been very useful, and if we have got welfare states and we've got labor rights, and workers in many parts of the world became more sort of conscious of their own rights, is because of trade union, and is because of social democracy. Well, here we can say that it was because of Peronism, and actually many people still think themselves Peronist because of what Peronism did in favor of workers, which was basically what social democracy did across the world, where social democratic government have been able to operate. But still, we need to go beyond simply accepting this institutionalization of the form of workers' organization, which of course it is fundamental if we want to go ahead and improve things, and it is clearly from from the workers' point of view, it is probably the form of organization that workers should have. And actually, my research on the organization of group of precarious workers which had no organization was going toward the union form. Maybe because of a certain idiosyncrasy of Argentina with the trade union form, because of the history of Argentina, but I don't think it was just this. There is clearly like a genuine attitude of workers toward trade unions rather than other organizations. But at the same time, if we go back to the history of trade unions, we see associations, we see mutualities each other on different issues which were not necessarily related to the workplace, were related to housing, were related to food provision and to security. So workers organize also because of these needs, not necessarily the one related to the workplace. The research I'm doing now on platform delivery workers is showing, for instance, that their most important concern is about security, transit accident, people that die because they're running fast, because they want to deliver more in less time. So again, trade unions, it's a process. It's probably the ending of other processes of solidarity building, and that's something that is important to focus on. So again, if we use a trade union center perspective, if we don't go beyond trade union fetishism, we will end up ignoring all this underworld of organization, either in the formal sector or in the informal sector. I think we really need also to cross this sector's idea, which I think it was flowed from the beginning, this sort of dualization between formal and informal. We really need to think probably about a sort of concept which cross sector. Precarity, it is clearly one which I think has also a political weight, but there might be others, and so this is clearly something that my provocation with trade union fetishism can invite people to do. So look at the underworld, look at processes, look at from different fields, and try to build with this possibly a stronger workers' movement by also looking at the way in which workers' organization is connected to broader class mobilization and class demands. This is, I think, is also very important. I think I'm now my 30 minutes time, so
yeah,
I'll stop here.
Thank you for keeping the time so perfectly. Yeah. Yeah. So then let's go to Joseph then for his comments and also discussion on the paper. So yeah, you have 5 to 10 minutes. 10 minutes, or yeah, but you're free to finish earlier as well.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Ying? Is it?
Yes, very clearly.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you, Maurizio, for such an interesting and as you say, provocative paper. To start with a couple of things that I think are useful, which I strongly agree with in what you've said today. I think it's very important we recognise that unions are not the sole form of workers' organisation, and indeed they're not even, in many contexts, the highest form of workers' organisation. That we can include the kind of formations you talked about, the early formations of associations and so on. We can think about workers' assemblies, think about the Nuit Debout in France or the Oaxaca Commune in Mexico 15 years ago. Or we can think about the much higher forms of workers' organisation that emerge in revolutionary contexts, the factory councils, as Antonio Gramsci sometimes contrasts with unions, the Soviets from 1905 and 1917, the Shuras of Iran in 1979, and so on, which are bodies that are class bodies, but they have an explicitly political function, and they have a far broader base within the working class, the mobilised working class, than most trade unions would achieve. Secondly, I think it's very important that we separate our understanding of unions from a fixation on certain institutionalized forms of trade union organisation that have developed in certain advanced capitalist countries in periods of social peace, let's say. The unions that we experience in Britain, and it's probably true in Argentina as well, are not typical of most unions in most time periods and in most geographical contexts. And indeed, some unions define themselves against this model of unionisation. I always remember the example of the Confederation of Bolivian Workers, which was formed in 1952 during a revolution, whose statutes contain the lines defining it as a genuine centralised system of revolutionary councils, whose historical origins are not to be found so much in English trade unions as the Paris Commune. Not words that you could imagine Francis O'Grady or someone like that endorsing. So the experience of trade unions is a wildly heterogeneous one. So I think Maurizio is correct to sort of fetishize, to criticise the fetishization of the union form in that sense. But, and although he's clarified this in what he said today, if you go back to the paper, I think there is sometimes an ambiguity between that rejection of the fetishized form through which industrial relations sometimes perceives unions, and the implication of the exhaustion of the trade union form itself. And it's that ambiguity that is much more uncomfortable particularly in the written form of the paper to me. I don't see, and as I say, Maurizio has clarified this a little bit with the remarks he made towards the end, why once you reject that fetishized and institutionalized conception of the trade union form itself is superseded. And I'm slightly worried that this idea of supersession or partial displacement of the trade union form that's implied in some of the paper is connected to a particular model of restructuring, which I'm uncomfortable with. It's stated at times that precarity and informalization are unifying concepts through which we can understand this restructuring. But I would want to argue that if we want to understand some of the problems with the trade union movement, we have to understand this restructuring as a much more variegated, much more concrete process that plays out quite differently in different contexts. And what would apply in one context as an explanation for the weakness and decline of trade unions clearly doesn't apply in others. If you take the British context, for example, you're still talking about a labour force in which 90% of workers have permanent contracts, in which the average tenure of employment is still something like 16 years. Precarity means something quite different in this context to what it would mean in many global south contexts or even in many southern European contexts. And therefore we have to be much more concrete when we want to explain the low ebb of union organisation, union struggle in particular contexts. To take a more concrete form of restructuring in Britain, of course, as we all recognise, many of the major bastions of working class strength historically and union strength historically in Britain have been reorganised, decimated, no longer exist. If you look at many manufacturing workplaces, mining and so on and so forth, this is certainly the case. But one of the striking things, if you look at Britain, you could say the same as in the case of the US, is that if you look at the degree of concentration of labour within the workplace, certainly until the beginning of 2020 anyway, all bets are off this year, but if you look up until 2019, there's a remarkable stability of issues like workplace size across the last 20 or 30 years. What's taking place inside the workplaces is very different, but as potential sites of organisation, they're still extraordinarily relevant. And moreover, if you look at the expansion of the labour force, there are probably more workers in large workplaces in Britain today than there were 30 or 40 years ago, often subject to the same kind of Taylorist regimes of control and discipline that we might expect to breed union organisation, whether you're talking about Amazon fulfilment centres, universities, hospitals, all of which in many ways have been sites of attempts at organisation and struggle in recent years. And if we take a broader global view, again, the process of restructuring is quite complex. If you look at China, for example, what we're seeing is a massive expansion of traditional manufacturing type workplaces on an absolutely huge scale. But it's not just there. If you look at the development of extractive industries, for example, in South Africa, many other countries, what you see tied to this is a logic of reorganization of work, which creates a terrain on which one might expect the union form to have a new resonance. And indeed, if you look at mining in contexts like Marikana in South Africa, or if you look at the kind of labour struggles that were developing in China 10 or 12 years ago, you see this renewed vitality or potential vitality of this form of organisation. And in some cases, this can take an explicitly political role. If you look at the recent wave of revolutions in the Arab world, in the context of Egypt in 2011, the wave of formation of independent trade unions and the struggle led by these independent unions was fairly critical at key moments in forcing through the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak in spring 2011, forcing the Army Council to intervene. Similarly, if you look at the recent revolutionary process in Sudan, one of the key forms of organisation here were the professional workers associations, which took a union form, which helped to coordinate and mobilise the layers of people who participated in this struggle. So my point is that, yes, we can reject this fetishisation of unions, but we have to return to the concept of the union in a broader sense as collective workers' organisation at the point of production, capable of defending and advancing workers' interests, economically, but also with all the limitations that we know about politically as well. And this idea of unions as schools of war for the working class, the ideas pioneered by first Frederick Engels and a little bit later Marx, I think in many ways have a newfound relevance, particularly if we remember that Engels and Marx were advancing these ideas in the 1840s in the face of a generalized skepticism and hostility towards unions on much of the left internationally. In fact, they were probably the two socialist theoreticians who first argued systematically for the relevance of unions. And a couple of final remarks on that. The relevance of unions within that conception never rested on the idea that workers' concerns lay solely within the sphere of production. David Harvey, who is cited in the paper, is of course right to say that workers have struggled on a variety of different terrains and for different reasons. But I think Harvey misses the point here. The point is always that the employment relation through which exploitation is organised is the privileged site at which workers' power to resist the encroachment of capital is concentrated. It's not to downplay the importance of the sphere of circulation and so on, but we're talking about where collective power rests, and here the workplace is a really fundamental terrain. And the relevance of the union form, I think, springs directly from these kind of social relations of capital. And incidentally, it's no coincidence, I think, that Harvey in his most recent writing and the videos that he's been broadcasting argues that any sort of sustained challenge to capital right now is undesirable because circulation has become so complex, we're so dependent on the circulation of capital that we can't possibly disrupt these workings. This is a very, very striking example of fetishism, if we want to talk about fetishism, and quite depressing coming from Harvey. Final point to conclude, I think, based on what I'm saying, we need to start from an understanding historically that the union form has not been restricted to these kind of institutional forms, that it's not been restricted either to those in stable, formalized employment. Rather, it's an expression of the living struggle of workers within the distinctive social relations of capital. And therefore, in periods of struggle, it extends way beyond these pockets of formalized workers. Yeah. If we look at the experience of new unionism in Britain in the 1880s, or if you look at Bolivia today or Sudan, and so you see the coordinating role of unions extending way beyond formalized workers into informalized and precarious workers. And so to end with a provocation of my own, I would say that we are seeing today the beginnings of a process of maturation of working class struggle in which new class forces are beginning to discover through struggles the forms through which they can organize their collective power. And within this process of maturation, revitalized and innovated forms of union are likely to play an extremely crucial role in the years ahead. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So is there anything that Maurizio would like to respond to urgently? Otherwise, we can just open the floor for a bit.
Yeah, I think we can open the floor.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So so we have at least half an hour for Q&A. So yeah, let's coordinate the Q&A session like this. So we'll first invite a first round of questions, like 2 to 3 questions. Feel free to raise your hand virtually. I mean, yeah, so that I can. So, yeah, and unmute. And remember to unmute yourself when you ask your questions, and then we'll go back to Maurizio to respond to the batch of questions. So first we have the first person who raised the hand. So Vincent, can you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yes. Hi everyone, thank you very much, Maurizio, for your paper. It was a great pleasure to hear your presentation and to go through your paper, to read it. And as many others, I think I really love your idea of fetishism. So I would really encourage you to further elaborate on it. But I think maybe you should dig more on this and what this means to have like unions as a fetish. And you so far elaborate on a Marxist, you draw a parallel between products and unions from a Marxist perspective. And I think because fetishism has been also developed in anthropologic studies and in psychological studies, maybe you could try to see, to study all the biases that having a fetish induces. And from these biases, you could further elaborate upon all the limitations that this implies for researchers in industrial relations. So if my comment would be, take this idea of fetishism maybe even more seriously and try to draw all the consequences of this and to see how blind this makes us. And from that, if you, I don't know, you might, for instance, identify 5 or 6 biases. And from that, you could elaborate all the limitations that we have in the field and see and more precisely identify all the blind spots and better identify all the blind spots in the field. So that would be my first comment generally. And then the second one would be maybe your image is quite black and white, unions or non-unions, and maybe there would be a point in also trying to better identify the overlap zones between what happens with unions and what happens without them. And there is also a large area where union and non-union reality overlap. And this might be also of interest. And I think this is thrown away with the order in your paper. So maybe this is also something to add to your paper. But besides that, I really love your idea, and I'm sure this will be a great contribution to the literature.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Well, I don't see more hands yet, so maybe Maurizio, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, on Joseph comments. I think probably my mistake in the way I've written or presented the paper, but I think I've stressed at different points the idea that my criticism it wasn't about trade unions, and it wasn't about then the importance, the historical importance, past, present, and future of trade unions. Actually, in one point, I say that trade unions are probably the best form of organization for workers. But it is more like saying that exactly because trade unions will be relevant and are relevant, and it is that it's important to shift our view from institutionalized perspective into more sort of movement kind of perspective, processual kind of analysis of workers' organization. I think in this way we can criticize the literature and put in evidence the gap that are existing there, while at the same time not throwing the baby with the water. No, how do you say in English? So I think it's of course very important to think about trade unions as a school of wars or fundamental channels to vehiculate workers' complaint, even starting from the fact that existing trade unions occupy strategic roles in strategic industries very often, or have a potential strategic role. But still, I mean, if we don't criticize a certain perspective on trade unionism, the ideas that look at the organization per se, then we're going to lose also all the possibility that exist even in sector that might be strategic from a point of view of organization. So I give you just an example. I'm a union member. We are, as you know, probably collecting signature abroad just to put evidence of our working condition for the government to act and to improve our salary, especially. But our trade union is a pro-government trade union, and they didn't want to mobilize in presence, like physically, because they were saying that there was the COVID and etc. So we had to organize in parallel to our union. So actually, the document asking for people to sign comes out from self-organized group of workers, some of which are union member and believe in the union and think that the union is the instrument to improve their condition. But at the same time, from a study point of view, from a research point of view, if you look at this current mobilization we are having, for instance, and if you look at it from the trade union perspective, you will see that there is no mobilization, that there is no action, but you won't see what is going on underground, under the union form. So again, I think this is just a small example to say what I've tried to stress many times, and it is probably difficult, on the one hand to be critical to the point of saying that there is a fetishism in the union form, while at the same time saying that we need trade unions. and people organize with trade unions. So I think there is probably something that I need to put it in a different paper, in a different way, probably going away from me dealing with the literature existing in the field, because of course it was also dialogue with the literature existing in the field. It was like a sort of call of attention, a methodological call of attention for the field of study. But at the same time, of course, I was touching like a very sensible issue from a political Marxist point of view. So I'm aware of this, and my paper, I think, mixed the two issues together, which I think it does in a good way. But of course, I probably need to develop a different paper which approach more the theoretical or the sort of strategic issues around the form of workers' organization, which of course it might clearly consider more broadly issue of in production system and the state of work capitalism more in general. And on what Vincent said, I think in a way what I just said it goes together with your idea of me sometimes sort of drawing in sort of black and white styles. So talking about union and non-union. Again, I think it's more saying we need to approach the union, and union is more studies of workers' organization in a less fetishist form, in a less institutionalized form, in a less organization per se form, and more in a processual form, and more in a step-by-step construction. Even when we start from an analysis of strategies of existing union, we need to be able to put into the framework also non-union or group of workers self-organization as part of the explanation of why a certain union has taken a certain action in a certain place in a certain context. As the example I made, if you consider just my trade union, you want to understand the kind of mobilization that workers at CONICET have put in place. And it's not just our case, of course, there are thousands of these. So here, again, I think it's an issue of, well, what kind of take of a certain problem do you use? In my case, it was like a paper thought to dialogue with the field of industrial relation and sociology of work, calling attention to something which I think it is not productive in terms of studies that might be strategically used by the workers' movement. So this was the real aim of my intervention.
Yeah, thank you very much. So apparently people have been warmed up. So we have two people from the audience who would like to ask questions. So the first, so can I ask Paul Brook to ask this question first, and then Gabriella Ciocci?
Thanks, Maurizio. I think that's really stimulating, and you're asking lots of important questions. I suppose from my point of view, I'm sat here thinking, I'm trying to sort of put myself in your seat and from your perspective, I'm saying, who's this audience? And you say quite clearly the industrial relations audience, but those of us, and also sociology of work. But I have to say, as somebody who works like you, works across those two spheres, I think there's a terrible silence in the sociology of work about trade unions. I would love a bit of fetishism sometimes. So I'll give you an example. So this famous renewing labour process, yeah, it barely mentions trade unions, and this is the sort of the last great sort of collection that sort of surveyed the labour process analysis tradition. I think likewise, look through some of the classic sociology of work textbooks, and you find very little mention of trade unions. What you do find, of course, is lots of mentions of worker resistance and misbehaviour. And again, you know, classic books, recent times, very little talk of trade unions. So I think if we are going to be looking at some sort of intervention, we have to understand that the institutionalized understandings of trade unions that you articulated, that we associate with traditional Western European and indeed North American and oceanic industrial relations, are something really quite distinctive in terms of the treatment of trade unions to, in what I would argue, the analytic silence you find in a lot of contemporary sociology work in precisely those same areas of the world, the English language stuff. So I think that's an important area to consider. I think secondly, is that I think if we are talking about distinctions, and it's picking up on Joseph's points about what we mean by trade unions and the distinction between trade unions as institutions and trade unions as expressions of workers' mobilization, organization and resistance, then we need to have a much stronger understanding of the nature, purpose, role and relationship of the institutional bureaucracy of the trade union with the ordinary lay members. And clearly this is, you know, this is not a new debate. It's been going on for decades and decades in the English speaking world. But I think for me, those are two important points that I take of your important intervention in this. So thanks anyway.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm Gabriella. Hello.
Yes. Hello. Yes. Maurizio, I was really impressed by the presentation. Thank you so much for that. And I was just thinking in terms of how do you think that is kind of fetishism, not only the academic one, but sometimes the institution that like the practitioners one themselves. I mean, how do you think that affects the worker themselves and the attempt to study or to organize concretely international forms of solidarity? I mean, what do you think are the effects on these two particular on these two different levels? That is the mobilizing, organizing actors that might somehow, I think, might feel like divided, or and at the international level. I mean, how do you think we can move beyond this fetishism? How do you think this fetishism affects our studies, the way how we look at international forms of solidarity, and how practitioners look at these forms of international forms of solidarity? Thank you.
Maurizio?
Yes.
Take your time.
Yeah, I mean, in respect with what Paul said, clearly my dialogue was with industrial relation literature. Although I totally agree that sociology of work must at least adopt a fetishism of trade unions, so at least included as a topic. I'm not sure, but I guess there is some sort of probably disciplinary boundary, like industrial relation do trade unions studies, and sociology of work is broader, so it goes away a bit from trade unionism or from trade union studies. But that's just my feeling. I'm not sure if it has always been like this historically. I also think that there is a movement away from trade unions because are considered not modern enough as a form of new expression or new sociological processes related to work. So there also some sort of postmodernist probably approach in the field of sociology of work, and similarly, in a way, within labor process, there is sometimes the need to look at a different form of resistance, and so not necessarily at one organization organizing this resistance. So probably for labor process theory is more like the kind of debate they want to give is more like looking at broader form of resistance, not necessarily focusing on the trade union form. So I think once again, what is missing is a discussion of trade unions as form of a really genuine form of workers' organization, or that is also like taking a picture of a class movement. This is what we are really missing across all disciplines, independently from the kind of approach each discipline want to use. And of course, I think the debate on bureaucracy is clearly fundamental, and we should probably revamp analysis that was everyday words in the 70s when the early Ayman was writing about rank and file and bureaucracy. There is much to say there. And here I think I might connect with what Gabriella asked in terms of putting in evidence the fetishism of certain form of organization, and also the fetishism then here in terms of bureaucracy. So what is really the union have to believe in terms of changing our condition? So is the one that is going to sit at the table with the employers and negotiate wages and working conditions because is the legal subject, or it is the movement of workers and people complaining because they have needs, they want to solve their problem and change their situations. So here there is all the time a contradiction, which it's probably inevitable. We have to go through this because we want to have to improve. We want to go through changes that can improve our condition, and this is associated to of course to dealing with the existing institution. So there is all the time this sort of contradiction, and we have to deal with it. As I said, I'm not an anti-union, quite the contrary, but I think we need to constantly be open to criticize the existing institution, to do something in an autonomous way, and then bring this autonomous sort of power into the institution again, by pushing for for practical things. I'm experiencing this now, and I'm with the dialogue I'm having with my colleagues and comrades. That's what we really need to do. Otherwise, we would be just waiting for people at bureaucratic level to send us messages of prosperity and not moving a finger. So it is just because we move that we got something. And it was clearly evident, and people recognize this, and so activism is made by the rank and file, to use this old expression, which we are not really soldiers, but each of us can do something, and united we are strong. No, this is the say. So clearly there is a need, I mean, to if we really want to build solidarity, and this is not just within one organization, it might be also across countries. It's by doing something. It's by doing things. It's by activating. And this activism that comes from the ground is going to be reflected sooner or later in the institution that are sort of deciding for us till the moment we allow them to decide for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the next person to ask question is Paolo Borghi, I think. Yeah. Paolo, can you unmute yourself, please? Hello, Paolo.
Unmute.
Sorry, Maurizio.
Okay.
Thank you very much. First of all, for your presentation and for your provocation. And what I want to say is that I want to take it really seriously. I mean, and in my point of view, taking it seriously, I mean, your provocation means not only to shift the point of view, not only on trade unions, but also on the different grassroots groups, the different movements, and so the different styles of organizing people. But it also means that we have to focus on trade unions in a different way. For example, from my experience, research experience on self-employment and representation of self-employment means that if we want to look at trade unions in a different way, means that we have to avoid to look at them as a homogeneous body, because inside the unions there are different groups, and some of them are really trying to build bridges with movements, with grassroots groups, trying to introduce or innovate, let's say, what trade unions are trying to do. And other groups or other level, let's say the top level, sometimes are trying to control the change and trying to slow down the change because they are not sure to what will happen if they change. So yeah, that's all. I'm in my experience, in my research experience, there are really good examples where trade unions and grassroots groups are collaborating now. It was not the case 2 years ago, and everything is changing really fast. And I'm speaking about the food delivery. That is really a top topic, not just in Italy, but at the moment in Italy because of a new fake contract. I don't know if you are following what is happening. But anyway, in this case, there are really, really good example of trade unions or some groups inside which are trying to build bridges with grassroots groups. So thank you.
Yes. Should we take others question, or if there are?
Well, so
Ying, there's a message from Bob Carter saying he's trying to speak.
Oh, right. Bob, can you unmute yourself, or shall I unmute you instead? No, I can't unmute you. I don't really know why, but right, cool. Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to just take Maurizio back to the paper a little bit, because he was clearer in the paper than in the presentation, in which he polarizes the views of trade unions as forms between social democratic perspective, which sees them as part of a reformist structure, close relations to the state on the one hand, or a Marxist one, which sees them, to use the phrase that Joseph used, schools for war, class war. But there's a long tradition within Marxism, which Joseph will be more than acquainted with, which actually sees the trade unions as institutions being full of ambiguity or contradiction. I mean, and if you look at, you can go to a very good article by Perry Anderson that, despite all his other weaknesses, he's analytically very clear about the position of unions as both opposition to capital and as an expression within it of workers' interests. But trade unions, but trade unions officialdom as institutions have a very conflicted attitude towards any outright assault on the state and employers. There's a lovely phrase from a German social democrat at the time saying, looking at capitalism on its deathbed and saying, I don't know whether I come here as a doctor or an undertaker, whether I need to save the firm in order that members still have a job, or take it to its logical conclusion and take over, which most trade unions have got no conception of. So the way in which this is normally played out and reflected actually within trade unions is the concept of a trade union bureaucracy. That there are the institutions, the structural position of trade unions within society predisposes them to compromise, and that reflects itself in the leadership and the pressures on the leadership. So you can see it as bad faith if which is sold down the river, but there are institutionalized pressures to do that, and you don't. And if you were to bring that out more clearly, that critical view, I think that would save some of the confusion that you introduced, I think, by not being able to articulate very clearly both your support and opposition to unions, because of the way in which they operate in practice, and then that in turn would mean that we would not have. We can talk about union form, but we should realise that there isn't uniformity. There are differences amongst trade unions for all sorts of reasons. And you mentioned in the paper, which you didn't mention in your presentation, the very radical and innovative work that many of the indie unions have done, often amongst people who would have been regarded as precarious workers that trade unions won't touch because they don't think it's worth it, or they don't think they're organised, or they don't want to go outside their traditional boundaries, and so on and so forth. So it's not that there's only one form of union, that's the one that's institutionalized and a third party. There is a constant movement inside to actually reform those and take over, revolutionize those structures, expressed, often through political critiques and often through rank and file movements, which of course, like everything else, go up and down according to the political context. But I think that would help your analysis, and then just generally just say that some of the way in which you talked about industrial relations and trade unions. Well, first of all, the industrial relations as a discipline barely exists anymore, really. And the work on trade unions, there's a real poverty of it, both in terms, I think, of quantity and in terms of quality, in terms of qualitative analysis of them, because, like, you know, nowhere do people very it's very rare to find someone who has has a critical view of trade unions as institutions and the pressures upon them and how they refer and reflect inside the union movement. So, yeah, I've got some other things, but I think that's probably enough. Thanks, anyway.
Thank you very much. So, Maurizio, would you like to respond for a bit?
Yes, I think clearly there is no homogeneous form, and I totally agree with what Paolo said. I think we are talking about the same thing, actually. Bob and what Paolo said, and what Paul earlier mentioned about this bureaucracy thing and this sort of multi-forms or sort of chameleontic form of organization, which is trade union. So there is there, of course, a problem which is theoretical and is hard to solve. Probably it can be solved, but just at least knowing that there is this problem, and what I think there is often what I think is often missing in perspective on trade unions is exactly this complex dynamic. So when you read about when you read paper that talk about trade union strategies and practices with precarious workers in that sector and the other sector, etc., you're clearly not looking at the reality of how this union form is multiply shaped by multiple factors. And of course by multiple contexts and by class action. So I think here we are partly in a theoretical conundrum, which might take ages to talk about. And I mean, I think it's fascinating to talk about and to think about. Strategies, more revolutionary, less revolutionary, but at the same time, there is a reality that we can change and that through research which we can put in evidence. So the possibility that within this chameleontic shaping form, the one that comes into the surface is the one that it really produces changes, not the one that consolidate or keep the capital body alive, using what you just said, Bob, but the one that try to put some venom into the body, at least to shake it up. So yes, I think again probably what I said earlier with Joseph's comment, there is a need to think about a different kind of intervention, which is more like theoretical and strategic from this point of view, which I don't think is less necessary. But initially, my feeling was that it was necessary to shake up our field, even if industrial relation might be a subfield. I think there is beyond industrial relation, there is an interdisciplinary field that is concerned with the labor, with workers, with the organization of workers, and we need to address these, and we need to dialogue with this broader field, which, as I said, it includes labor anthropologists, labor geographers, more theoretical Marxism, and etc. And I just had, I mean, about this Marxist and social democracy thing that I put in the paper, because I think there is also a Marxist, a left Marxist fetishism in trade unions, especially in Trotsky's analysis of trade unions organization. What I earlier said, there is a sort of like an apotheosis of glorious struggle and very much less attention of no struggles, no mobilization, and we need to understand this. Because it might be that there will be struggles, and we need to know. I mean, as a scientist, we need to understand this earlier in order to sort of be inspiring for worker and for science, for society. You know? So the experiences of platform delivery workers are very important from this point of view, and I'm following closely not just what happened in Italy, but of course what is going on here, and doing actually field work on this. So happy to know that you're also going in the same direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we're actually, we're actually approaching the estimated finishing time of the webinar. Thank you everyone for participating. But before that, just for your information, Paul has kindly put Mauricio's paper in the chat box. So if you didn't manage to access it, just go to the chat box and look for the PDF version of it. Hopefully it is accessible. Otherwise, just let any of us know. Yeah, and also this is the first webinar organized by CEIL in the current academic year. So Paul, would you like to give us a glimpse of what's going to happen next?
Yeah, well, our next webinar is on November the 4th at 2 o'clock, what will be GMT, 2 o'clock, for those of you that are not in the UK. And it will be a sort of on the front line special with Sarah Hallett, who is chair of the British Medical Association Junior Doctors Committee. So that's the doctors union in the UK. Now we're hoping she'll be able to make it, but as she told us a few weeks ago, that the current COVID second wave planning is reaching a peak around about the end of October, December, and looks like London may well be going into extra measures within the next week or so anyway. So we're still hoping we can have it. She wants to, what she's basically going to be telling us about is her experience of becoming a trade union activist during the junior doctor strikes in the UK in 2016, where she was a sort of leading rank and file organizer, going on to become today the sort of leading lay figure. She's still a rank and file doctor. She's a paediatrician in London, and what it's like actually leading a frontline union during the COVID strike and the challenges they have and going forward. And also, and I think this is really interesting given the context of our discussion today, is that the BMA has very much emerged in the last decade from being primarily a professional organisation into a trade union that is as well known for its militancy as but basically any other union at the moment currently in this country. Doesn't mean to say that it has a strong tradition of militancy, but it has shown a willingness to take strike action, has shown a willingness to really criticise government, to organise, particularly within the NHS, among other NHS unions, around the issues posed by COVID and indeed inequality, and more generally about the role of trade unions during the COVID crisis. So I hope you can join us, and indeed I hope that Sarah can join us as well, but that's what's planned. So thanks very much for turning up today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'll send all the information out, obviously.
Yeah, so please just keep an eye on the upcoming development. So yeah, so that is it for today. Then thank you very much for coming. Feel free to mingle for a bit as you would normally do in a physical seminar, but otherwise, yeah, goodbye and take care.
Thanks
a lot for the invitation and for the beautiful and great audience and questions.
Yeah, thank you, Maurizio, and thank you, Joseph.
Okay, so can we, those of us, Joseph, Ying, Maurizio, do you want to just hold on so we can just sort of
yeah, sure,
have a quick chat afterwards about this?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can as well if you want, Bob.
Yeah, I'm off just a few seconds. I'll be back in a minute.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Marie. I just thought we could have a quick reflection on what went well and what didn't. Yeah?
Yeah.
Given this is the first time we've gone international with these.
The recording at this point.
Oh, yes, we are.
Oh, yes.
Good point. I shall stop the recording.
So can anyone in the